Good morning once again, everyone. I'm very thankful that y'all could join me. Now, we left off yesterday with Joseph being placed in the prison after being accused of rape by Potiphar's wife. And today, let's just get right into it. And it came to pass after these things that the butler of the king of Egypt and his baker had offended their lord, the king of Egypt. I'm talking about the Pharaoh. And Pharaoh was wroth against two of his officers, against the chief of the butlers, and against the chief of the bakers. So these were both the heads over the Pharaoh's butlers. Okay, they were chief over them. So these were the main men. In the Joseph movie, they try to put forth that maybe the Pharaoh, one of them had stolen the cup, one of Pharaoh's golden cups or whatever. But it's more likely, according to my studies, that one of them was being suspected of a plot to poison the Pharaoh. If you'll notice what they're chief over, one of them is chief over the drinks, which is the butler, and the other is chief over the food of Pharaoh, and that's the baker. So it just makes more sense to think that there is a possible poisoning motive or plot right here. So could be, that would make the most sense to me, because it apparently warrants an immediate death upon the end of the investigation. And he put them in ward in the house of the captain of the guard, Potiphar, into the prison, the place where Joseph was bound. And the captain of the guard, Potiphar, charged Joseph with them, and he served them, and they continued a season in ward. Notice right here how Potiphar is still exalting Joseph. He's still talking to him. He's still putting him in charge of everything. I believe this is further validation that he didn't really believe his wife whenever it came to her accusations against Joseph. Also notice how it says that Joseph served them, even though he was exalted, even though he was the boss of the prison. Basically, he ran everything. He could put them anywhere that he wished. These were two suspected, well, I mean, they were criminals in the eyes of Pharaoh, so he could have really have treated them any way that he liked, but he served them. And a good leader will be a even better servant, much like how, of course, Christ, he King of all things and King of kings, yet he washed the feet of his disciples. He came down here and he left all the glory of heaven behind, and he would just serve people. Who healed Jesus? No one healed Jesus, but he went around healing everyone. It didn't matter if you was male, female, Jew, Gentile. He was healing everyone. And they dreamed a dream, both of them. Each man his dream in one night, each man according to the interpretation of his dream, the butler and the baker of the king of Egypt, which were bound in the prison. And Joseph came in unto them in the morning, and looked upon them, and behold, they were sad. These dreams were obviously very moving to these men. These were heavy dreams, and we're about to get into some of the various factors of dreams right here in just a second. And Joseph asked Pharaoh's officers that were with him in the ward of his lord's house, saying, Wherefore look ye so sadly today? This so sounds like what the father told Elijah and others. He asked him, whenever he fell into this pit of depression, he goes up, and in a voice he tells Elijah, he says, What doest thou here, Elijah? Just a very simple, easy question. And Elijah was very sad, very depressed, and anxiety driven. So this is further showing how filled with the Spirit of God that Joseph truly was. And they said unto him, We have dreamed a dream, and there is no interpreter of it. And Joseph said unto them, Do not interpretations belong to God? Tell me them, I pray you. The reason why Joseph is wanting to hear of the dreams is told to us in the previous verse. He says, What are you so sad for? He's trying to console them. And just furthermore touching on the good character of Joseph, I mean, he had every reason in the world to be the one sad and depressed. Yet here he is just, well, just tell me your dream. That's, he's trying to uplift him a little bit, and we'll see that only works part way. And the chief butler told his dream to Joseph and said to him, In my dream, behold, a vine was before me. And in the vine there were 3 branches, and it was as though it budded, and her blossoms shot forth, and the clusters thereof brought forth ripe grapes. And Pharaoh's cup was in my hand, and I took the grapes, and pressed them into Pharaoh's cup, and I gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. And Joseph said unto him, This is the interpretation of it. The 3 branches are 3 days. Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thine head, and restore thee unto thy place, and thou shalt deliver Pharaoh's cup into his hand, after the former manner when thou wast his butler. If you'll notice, Joseph is saying 3 days. This is not common with false interpreters, false prophets. This is not common with them. They usually say in a far off land, far off, they're very vague. If you'll recall the now deceased man, Harold Camping, how he used to predict the apocalypse and rapture. He used to do all this, and he'd name specific days, and it would have to be like a year from then. And then if he got it wrong, he would say, well, I was a little bit off here. It's 5 more months. And, so, I mean, obvious false prophets. Joseph said in 3 days. But think on me when it shall be well with thee, and show kindness, I pray thee, unto me, and make mention of me unto Pharaoh, and bring me out of this house. For indeed I was stolen away out of the land of the Hebrews, and here also have I done nothing that they should put me into the dungeon. When the chief baker saw that the interpretation was good, he said unto Joseph, I also was in my dream, and behold, I had 3 white baskets on my head. So he's thinking, tell me good things, man. Yeah, this sounds good. And in the uppermost basket there was of all manner of baked meats for Pharaoh, and the birds did eat them out of the basket upon my head. If you'll notice, with the butler, he is giving the Pharaoh these grapes, or this wine. And with the butler, he is having his taken away. Not just taken away, but taken away from something that eats dead things. And so you can see how God was using very, very specific, figurative images in order to get his message to these men. And Joseph answered and said, This is the interpretation thereof. The 3 baskets are 3 days. Yet within 3 days shall Pharaoh lift up thy head from off thee. You see, the baker was probably really excited. He's hearing the exact same kind of dream interpretation, and then all of a sudden, from off thee. You see how hard-hitting words are? How just a single little change in words, just a single addition in words, can just totally change the entire situation that you're in. That happens to the baker. And shall hang thee on a tree, and the birds shall eat thy flesh from off thee. And it came to pass the 3rd day, which was Pharaoh's birthday, that he made a feast unto all his servants, and he lifted up the head of the chief butler and of the chief baker among his servants. And he restored the chief butler unto his butlership again, and he gave the cup into Pharaoh's hand. But he hanged the chief baker, as Joseph had interpreted to them. Yet did not the chief butler remember Joseph, but forgat him. So he's not remembering Joseph at that time. I like what the old-timey preacher once said. How many there are who are willing to preach the cupbearer's sermon, but are unwilling to preach the baker's sermon. So many preachers want to give feel-good messages all the time. Never ever tell anybody about anything negative. This life's hard enough. You got to tell them something good. That way they'll at least be encouraged in some way. What you tell them is truth. And like the old adage is, truth hurts. Truth hurts. If you have cancer and a man comes up to you, and a doctor comes up to you, and he says, well, I don't want to hurt their feelings, but they definitely got cancer, And if they don't get treatment, they're going to die. But I would rather spare their feelings now, and I think that'll work best. That is the equivalent of a false teacher, of a false prophet, a preacher who will not preach the word to the true form of it. It would be far better for them to hear that they have cancer at that point so that they can obviously have a chance to be rid of it. But how many preachers would much rather preach the cupbearer's sermon? But now just a little quick last notes on dreams and nightmares. Let's just do a little bit of digging into them. The Bible says this about them. This is just a few verses pertaining to dreams. Job says in Job 7:14, "Then thou scarest me with dreams and terrifiest me through visions." He's talking to God. In Job 33:15, we read, "In a dream and a vision of the night, when deep sleep falleth upon men, and slumberings upon the bed, then he, God, openeth the ears of men, and sealeth their instruction." In Numbers 12:6, we read this, "And the Lord said, Hear now my words. If there be a prophet among you, I, the Lord, will make myself known unto him in a vision, and will speak unto him in a dream." We know that throughout the Bible, many, be it Gentile, Jew, believer, non-believer, whatever, it doesn't matter. Numerous people from all kinds of backgrounds receive dreams from God. We know they're from God. We just read how Laban experienced a dream from God concerning Jacob. We read of Nebuchadnezzar, who was a non-believer, a pagan king of Babylon. He also received a very important dream from God in the book of Daniel, and how Jacob received a dream from God, Joseph received a dream from God. If also you'll remember how Joseph in the New Testament, Joseph and Mary, once that Christ is born, Joseph is given a dream and he's told to go to flee with his family to Egypt in order to save them from Herod. It's just kind of funny because it says in Matthew 1 how Jacob is Joseph's father's name, and flee to Egypt, the exact same, through words, it's the exact same kind of, it's got so many commonalities, so many things in common with Joseph that we're reading right now of the Old Testament, his father being named Jacob, him going to Egypt, and the family of Jacob being saved because of Egypt, because they go into Egypt, and God being the reason why all that happened. But that's a quick little side note. But anyway, we see how God gives dreams. It doesn't matter if you believe in him or not. Lady Gaga actually has an interview where she speaks about having a dream about the devil, how it terrified her.
I had this dream quite recently that was so terrifying, so morbid and terrifying, and I called Deepak Chopra, who I work with, and I was telling him my dream, terrified, that the devil, and the dream was so terrifying, I thought somehow a devil force was trying to take hold of me, a darkness. Mm. I guess I see devil and darkness as the same thing. And he laughed and told me that I was very creative. And that
that's what it represents.
Learn to embrace my insanity.
I believe that these are merciful dreams, to be honest with you. It's kind of showing their state in life. But just to be clear, the vast majority of dreams are not from God. Ecclesiastes 5:3 says, "For a dream cometh through the multitude of business, and a fool's voice is known by a multitude of words." So a dream can come if you've been thinking about too many on one subject, too much, even subconsciously, if it's just kind of been pushed to the back of your mind, but it's kind of not being released, it's not getting there. One can easily read in this WebMD article on dreams about why do people have nightmares, and they often happen because of stress, conflict, and fear, trauma, emotional problems, medication or drug use, illness. And the Department of Veterans Affairs talk about how PTSD triggers nightmares more often than not having PTSD. It says right here, among the general public, about 5% of people complain of nightmares. Those who have gone through a trauma, though, are more likely to have distressing nightmares after the event. This is true no matter what type of trauma it is. So one can easily gather that if you think on something, if something is bothering you mentally too much or emotionally too much, then you may dream about it over and over again. It may trouble you, and your brain may have trouble, I guess, compartmentalizing it. But in Joel 2:28 we read this, and it shall come to pass afterward that I, the Lord, will pour out my spirit upon all flesh, and your sons and your daughters shall prophesy, your old men shall dream dreams, your young men shall see visions. Believe it or not, science has become a lot more interested in this, even given the empirical testing that can take place nowadays. There's a lot of intrigue on whether dreams can predict the future because it's been known to happen. I've even seen it in my own family. I'm not going to give the exact details, but I have a family member who a man died and they could not find his body. Then, or he just come up missing. They didn't know where he was. And I have a family member, a very close family member, who said just a couple of days before they found him how he dreamed that someone killed him or he died in a cave. And they wound up, about 48 hours later, they found him dead in a cave. And but I've dreamed of the rapture. I heard the trumpet in it. It was the most bizarre thing. I've met many Christians that have had dreams of the rapture, and the most cataclysmic things that you could ever imagine. But these dreams have happened. But even in this article, they're speaking on the exact same subject. Can dreams reveal potential or predict the future? The author goes on to explain how their uncle told them about a dream that he had. He proceeded to tell me that he'd been dreaming of all the people in our family who had passed on, the article says. He said none of them had even addressed him, but were simply hanging around in the dream. What he found interesting was that he never remembered his dreams, but with these ones he remembered everything. As fate would have it, and 2 weeks later he died from a massive heart attack. The whole family was in a state of shock and disbelief. This happens all the time. Here's an article from dailymail.com. The scientist who says we can see the future in our dreams think premonitions are just hokum. A tantalizing book by a top neuroscientist will send shivers down your spine. The article goes on to talk about studies that they have been doing over years and years, dealing with people's dreams and whether they can tell the future or not. We are entering a time, pun intended, in scientific history where we are just starting to realize that we don't have a clear grasp on the rules of time. I believe that as science advances, precognition, telling of the future, seeing the future, will come to be more fully understood and even accepted as normal. In the meantime, precognition can be thought of as a form of mental time travel. It's like a pull from the future. These pulls, for most people, happen in the form of the brain's nighttime activity, a dream. Precognitive dreams are the most commonly reported psychic experience, with research suggesting 15 to 30% of people have experienced them. Events predicted in them seem to happen about 40% of the time the day after the dream. So what we are seeing is proof of what has always happened from the beginning of time. I'm telling you, science is just catching up with the Bible. So this is Genesis 40 today. Lord of peace be with you all. Amen.